I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, and what I discovered on March 22, 2023, shattered everything I believed about trust and loyalty. What started as a routine evidence audit turned into the most disturbing revelation of my career, one that made me question everyone I thought I could trust. My name is Sheriff Marcus Thompson, and I run the Clearwater County Sheriff's Office in rural Georgia. It's a tight-knit department, only 12 deputies, 3 detectives, and a handful of support staff. We're like family here, which made what happened so much more devastating. The morning started like any other. Heavy rain had been pounding our county for 3 days straight, making the back roads nearly impassable and keeping most of our patrol units busy with weather-related calls. I was catching up on paperwork when Detective Sarah Martinez knocked on my office door. "Sheriff, we've got a problem with the evidence room," she said, her voice carrying that tone that immediately puts you on edge. "The quarterly audit doesn't match our records." I followed Sarah down the narrow hallway to our evidence storage facility. As the elected sheriff, I took pride in running a clean operation. We'd never had discrepancies before, and the timing couldn't be worse. We were 3 weeks away from a major drug trafficking trial that had consumed most of our resources for the past 8 months. Sarah pulled out her tablet and showed me the discrepancy report. "We're missing 2 kilos of cocaine from the Henderson drug bust, 3 handguns from various cases, and about $12,000 in cash seizures from the past 6 months. My stomach dropped. Missing evidence meant compromised cases, potential lawsuits, and the kind of scandal that could destroy careers and let criminals walk free. But more than that, it meant someone in my department, someone I trusted, was stealing from the evidence room. "Who has access?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "You, me, Detective Johnson, Deputy Williams, who manages intake, and—" She paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Deputy Kevin Morrison." Kevin Morrison. My best friend since the police academy, my best man at my wedding, godfather to my youngest daughter. The guy who'd saved my life during a domestic violence call 5 years ago when a suspect got the drop on me. The deputy I'd personally recommended for promotion 3 times. "We need to review the access logs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The access logs painted a disturbing picture. Over the past 6 months, Kevin had been entering the evidence room during odd hours, late evenings after his shift ended, early mornings before anyone else arrived, and twice during his supposed vacation days. Each entry corresponded with missing items. But the real smoking gun came when Sarah pulled the security footage. Our camera system was old and spotty, but we had enough coverage to see Kevin entering the evidence room at 11:47 p.m. on February 15th. The timestamp showed him leaving 18 minutes later, carrying a small black bag that hadn't been there when he entered. I watched the footage 3 times, hoping I was wrong, hoping there was some explanation. But there wasn't. My best friend, the man I trusted with my life, was systematically stealing evidence from ongoing cases. The implications were staggering. The Henderson case alone involved a major trafficking operation that we'd been building for 2 years. Without the physical evidence, the charges might not stick. A career criminal could walk free because someone I trusted had sold us out. I called Kevin immediately. "Hey, can you come in? We need to talk about the evidence room audit." "Sure thing, boss." "Everything okay?" His voice sounded normal, friendly, the same Kevin who'd been calling me that for 15 years. "Just some paperwork issues. Nothing major." While waiting for Kevin, I did something that made me feel sick. I started looking for signs I'd missed. Kevin had been buying new things lately: a boat, expensive clothes, taking his family on vacation to Disney World. I'd been happy for him, thinking he'd been smart with his money. Now I wondered where that money had really come from. When Kevin arrived 20 minutes later, soaked from the rain and wearing his usual friendly smile, I felt like I was going to throw up. This was a man I'd known for half my life, someone I considered a brother. "What's this about, Marcus?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I slid the access logs across the desk. "Can you explain these entries?" Kevin's face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked almost like relief. He leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. Those 5 words confirmed my worst fears. No denials, no explanations, just resignation. The Kevin I thought I knew would have been outraged at the accusation. This Kevin was asking how long I'd known about his betrayal. The audit flagged the discrepancies this morning. "Kevin, what the hell is going on?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really don't know, do you? You have no idea what's been happening right under your nose. Then tell me." Kevin stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked parking lot. "It started small. Just skimming a little cash here and there. Nobody notices a few $100s from a drug bust when there's $20,000 on the table. But it escalated," I said. "It had to. They wanted more than just money, Marcus. They wanted intelligence. Case files, evidence, witness information. They were paying good money for it." The word they hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just theft, this was organized corruption. "Who is they, Kevin?" He turned back to face me, and for the first time, I saw something cold in his eyes that I'd never noticed before. "People who have been very patient with your little crusade against drug trafficking in this county. People who think you've been making things too difficult for their business operations." The room felt like it was spinning. "You've been feeding information to drug dealers? I've been keeping my family safe and making sure we could afford to live the kind of life we deserve. Do you know what deputies make in this county, Marcus? Do you know what it's like watching your kids go without while you chase glory in some war on drugs that doesn't mean anything?" I stared at this man I thought I knew, trying to process what he was telling me. "The Henderson case? They knew about the raid a week before it happened. They moved most of their operation, left just enough behind to make it look good. You got the small fish, Marcus. The real players are still out there." Every major case we'd worked in the past 2 years suddenly took on a different context. Witnesses who'd disappeared, suspects who'd fled before arrests, evidence that had seemed to vanish, it all made sense now. "How many cases, Kevin?" "Enough." He sat back down, looking almost relieved to finally be talking about it. "You want to know the really funny part? They were going to let you play sheriff for a few more years. Keep making small busts, keep thinking you were making a difference. But then you started getting too close to their operation, asking too many questions about connections between cases." The weight of his betrayal was crushing. "So you decided to destroy evidence instead?" "I decided to cover my tracks before everything came apart. The evidence I took? It's already been destroyed. No DNA, no fingerprints, no ballistics matches. Half the cases you're so proud of won't hold up in court." I reached for my radio, but Kevin held up his hand. "I wouldn't do that yet, Marcus. You're under arrest. Think about what arresting me means. Think about how many cases fall apart, how many criminals walk free, how the community loses faith in the sheriff's office. Think about your career, your family's future." For a moment, I almost hesitated. The scandal would be enormous. My department would be investigated, my leadership questioned, my political career destroyed. But then I thought about all the victims whose cases had been compromised, all the families who deserved justice. I picked up my radio. "Dispatch, I need Detective Martinez to my office immediately. And call the state police, we need to report evidence tampering." Kevin's friendly mask finally slipped completely. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. This goes deeper than you know. Arresting me is just going to make things worse for everyone." "What do you mean?" He stood up again, this time moving toward the door. "You think I'm the only one? You think in a department this small, with operations this sophisticated, that I could do this alone?" The implication hit me like ice water. "Who else?" Kevin paused at the door. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who else in your precious department has been keeping secrets from you?" Before I could respond, Sarah Martinez knocked on the door. Kevin looked at her, then back at me, and I saw something pass between them, just a brief glance, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. "Come in, detective," I said, watching both of their faces carefully. As Sarah entered, Kevin moved past her toward the hallway. I'll be in the break room when you're ready to continue this conversation, Sheriff. After Kevin left, Sarah closed the door behind her. Sir, I've been thinking about the evidence discrepancies. There might be more cases affected than we initially thought. I studied her face, looking for any sign that she was part of this conspiracy. But Sarah looked genuinely concerned, professionally focused. Still, Kevin's words echoed in my mind. You think I'm the only one? How many more cases? I asked. Potentially dozens. If someone's been systematically compromising evidence for months, we need to review every major case from the past 2 years. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear. This wasn't just about Kevin's betrayal, this was about the integrity of our entire department, every case we'd worked, every arrest we'd made. I made the hardest decision of my career that day. I called the state police, the FBI, and our internal affairs division. Within hours, federal agents were interviewing every member of my department. The media caught wind of the story by evening. But as I sat in my office that night, long after Kevin had been arrested and taken away in federal custody, his final words haunted me. This goes deeper than you know. I thought about every deputy, every detective, every civilian employee who had access to sensitive information. I thought about cases that had fallen apart for reasons I couldn't explain. I thought about how many times criminals had seemed to stay one step ahead of our investigations. The rain continued to pound against my office window as I started making a list of everyone in the department who'd had access to the compromised cases. The list was longer than I wanted to admit. And that's when I realized the worst part: Kevin's arrest wasn't the end of this nightmare. It was just the beginning. Over the next few days, as federal investigators combed through our files and interviewed our staff, a pattern began to emerge. The corruption wasn't limited to evidence tampering. There were communication leaks, strategic information that had clearly been shared with criminal organizations, and a level of coordination that suggested multiple people were involved. 3 days after Kevin's arrest, I received a call that changed everything. Detective Martinez walked into my office with a file folder and a grim expression. Sheriff, we found something in Deputy Williams' desk during the federal search. Deputy Williams, the officer responsible for evidence intake. The same evidence room that had been compromised. My heart sank as Sarah opened the folder. Inside were copies of case files, witness statements, and confidential investigative reports. Files that should never have been copied, never have left the secured system. Files that belonged to active cases involving the same criminal network that Kevin had been feeding information to. Where is Williams now? I asked. That's the problem, sir. He called in sick yesterday, and hasn't reported for duty. His wife says he left for work this morning, but he never arrived. His patrol car is missing, and he's not responding to radio calls. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just one corrupt deputy, this was a coordinated effort involving multiple members of my department. As I looked at the evidence spread across my desk, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my department, my officers, and my friends had been a lie. The rain outside seemed to match the storm that was about to tear through our community. But the real question remained: if Kevin and Williams were compromised, who else in my department was working for the enemy? And how many other sheriffs across the county were facing the same devastating betrayal from the people they trusted most? What I discovered next would shake the foundations of law enforcement in our entire region. But that revelation would have to wait until the next day, when a phone call from the FBI would reveal the true scope of this conspiracy. Have you ever worked in a job where you later discovered colleagues were working against everything you believed in? How do you think you'd handle discovering that someone you trusted completely had been betraying you for years? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about your experiences with workplace betrayal. 3 days after Kevin's arrest, I thought the worst was behind us. Federal agents were still crawling through our files, Deputy Williams remained missing, and the media was having a field day with our corruption scandal. But on March 25, 2023, a seemingly unrelated complaint would lead me to discover something that made the evidence room theft look like petty crime. I'd barely slept since Kevin's betrayal came to light. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying 15 years of friendship, looking for signs I'd missed. So when dispatch called at 6:30 a.m. about a noise complaint, I decided to handle it myself. Sometimes getting back to basic police work helps clear your head. The complaint came from Riverside Drive in the Oak Hills subdivision, one of the nicer neighborhoods on the outskirts of Bakersfield. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez had called 3 times in the past week about her neighbor's dog barking incessantly at night. "It's not normal barking, Sheriff," she explained when I arrived at her modest 2-story home. Mrs. Rodriguez was in her 70s, a retired school teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. "This dog is distressed. It barks and whines for hours, always facing the same direction toward the house behind us on Maple Court." I followed her to her backyard. The March morning was crisp, with remnants of the recent rains still dripping from the oak trees that gave the subdivision its name. She pointed toward a privacy fence that separated her property from the house behind hers. "That's the Henderson's dog, a golden retriever named Max. Sweet dog, usually quiet. But for the past 2 weeks, something's got him spooked. He stands right there at that corner of their yard and barks toward that blue house." I looked in the direction she was pointing. Through the gaps in the fence, I could see a modest blue ranch house on Maple Court. The yard was well maintained, nothing obviously suspicious. "Have you talked to the Hendersons about it?" "That's just it, they're out of town visiting their daughter in Phoenix. Have been for 3 weeks. Their son Michael is supposed to be house-sitting and taking care of Max, but I hardly ever see him. The dog's been left alone most of the time." This was starting to make more sense. A neglected dog, owners away, irresponsible house-sitter, standard suburban drama. But Mrs. Rodriguez seemed genuinely concerned about more than just noise. "Sheriff, I've been teaching children for 40 years. You learn to recognize when something's wrong, even if you can't put your finger on it. That dog is trying to tell us something." I walked around to Maple Court to get a better look at the blue house. It belonged to someone named David Brennan, according to the mailbox. The property looked normal enough: small front yard, 2-car garage, standard suburban architecture. But as I stood there, I heard it. The barking Mrs. Rodriguez had described wasn't typical dog noise. It was urgent, almost frantic, and it was coming from the Henderson property directly behind Brennan's house. The golden retriever was standing at his back fence, facing Brennan's house, barking with an intensity that made the hair on my neck stand up. I knocked on Brennan's front door. No answer, but I could hear what sounded like a television playing inside. I tried again, louder this time. After a few minutes, the door opened to reveal a thin man in his 40s with nervous eyes and an unkempt beard. "David Brennan?" "Yeah, that's me. Is there a problem, officer?" "Sheriff Thompson, Clearwater County. We've had some noise complaints about a neighbor's dog. The barking seems to be directed at your property. Have you noticed anything unusual?" Brennan's reaction was immediate and telling. His eyes darted past me to the Henderson house, then back to my face. "Dog? No, I don't really pay attention to dogs. I work nights, sleep during the day. Haven't noticed any barking." But as he spoke, Max started up again, that same urgent, distressed barking. Brennan flinched at the sound. "Mind if I take a look around your backyard? Maybe there's something attracting the dog's attention, dead animal, garbage, something like that. Actually, this isn't really a good time. I was just heading to work." I glanced at my watch. 7:15 a.m. "Where do you work that starts this early?" Another pause, more nervous glances. "I'm between jobs right now. I meant I had errands to run." Every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of law enforcement was screaming that something was wrong. Brennan's behavior, the dog's reaction, the timing, it all felt off. "Mr. Brennan, I'm just trying to solve a neighborhood noise issue. A quick look at your backyard would help me figure out what's got the dog upset. I really can't right now. Maybe later today?" That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Through the partially open door, I could see into Brennan's living room. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, all appearing to be taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. and from what I could see, they all featured the same subject, a young woman with dark hair. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to need you to step outside so we can talk." His demeanor changed instantly. The nervous energy became defensive aggression. "Am I under arrest? Because if not, I don't have to talk to you." "No, you're not under arrest. But I have reasonable suspicion that there might be something on your property that's disturbing the neighborhood. I'd like your consent to take a look around." "I don't consent to anything. I know my rights." The dog's barking was getting more frantic. Through the fence slats, I could see Max pacing back and forth, clearly agitated about something specific in Brennan's backyard. I had a choice to make. I could walk away, come back with a warrant if I could find probable cause, or I could trust 15 years of instinct that told me something was very wrong here. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be straight with you. That dog has been barking at your house for 2 weeks straight. You're acting nervous about a simple noise complaint. And I can see what appears to be surveillance photographs on your walls. I need to know what's going on here." Brennan's face went pale. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, but not before I got a better look at those photographs. They definitely showed a young woman jogging, getting into her car, sitting at outdoor cafes. Surveillance photos. "Those pictures are of a friend of mine," he said quickly. "She knows I take them." "What's her name?" That's personal information." I was reaching for my radio to call for backup when something caught my eye in Brennan's garage. The door was slightly open, and I could see what looked like more photography equipment, professional cameras, telephoto lenses, and something else that made my heart race. A whiteboard covered with what appeared to be a schedule. From my angle, I could make out times, dates, and what looked like addresses. This wasn't hobby photography, this was systematic surveillance. "Mr. Brennan, I need you to open your garage." "No. I want you to leave my property now." That's when Max's barking changed. Instead of the general alarm bark he'd been doing, he started making a different sound, almost like he was calling for help. I looked toward the Henderson house and saw something that made me forget all about warrants and probable cause. There was a basement window on the side of Brennan's house that faced the Henderson property. The window was partially below ground level, and there was movement behind it. Not the movement of someone casually walking around, quick, frantic movement like someone trying to get attention. "Mr. Brennan, is there someone in your basement?" That's just the TV. I told you, I was watching TV." But the movement in the basement window didn't look like TV light. It looked like someone moving back and forth, trying to be seen. I made my decision. "Sir, I have reasonable suspicion that someone may be in distress on your property. I'm going to investigate." Brennan lunged for his front door, but I was faster. As he tried to get inside, I grabbed his arm and spun him around. "David Brennan, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice." As I cuffed him, he started talking fast. "You don't understand, she wanted to be there. She's my girlfriend. We have a relationship. Who's in your basement? Nobody's in distress. She's there voluntarily." But even as he said it, I could hear muffled sounds coming from the house, sounds that definitely weren't coming from a television. I called for immediate backup and paramedics, then made the decision to enter the house. What I found in David Brennan's basement changed everything I thought I knew about the corruption in my department. The basement had been converted into what could only be described as a prison cell. A young woman was chained to a bed, clearly malnourished and terrified. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the wall of photographs, documents, and what appeared to be law enforcement files. This wasn't just kidnapping, this was a stalking operation that had been going on for months, possibly years. And among the law enforcement documents were case files from my department. Files that should have been confidential. Files that had clearly been used to track this woman's movements, her interactions with police, her attempts to report being stalked. The victim, who I later learned was 26-year-old Jennifer Walsh, had been missing for 2 weeks. She'd been reported missing by her family, but somehow that report had never made it to my desk. Looking at the documents on Brennan's wall, I could see why. There were copies of police reports Jennifer had filed over the past 6 months, reports about being followed, about threatening phone calls, about someone breaking into her apartment. Reports that had been buried or dismissed. And attached to each report was a handwritten note with details about how the investigation had been handled. The handwriting looked familiar. As paramedics took Jennifer to the hospital and federal agents secured the crime scene, I studied those handwritten notes more carefully. The writing style, the specific abbreviations used, the way certain letters were formed. I'd seen this handwriting hundreds of times over the years. It was Kevin Morrison's handwriting. My best friend, the man I trusted with my life, hadn't just been stealing evidence and feeding information to drug dealers. He'd been providing intelligence to a stalker, helping him track and eventually kidnap his victim. But the connections went deeper than that. As investigators combed through Brennan's files, they found evidence of a network, other stalkers, other victims, other cases that had been mishandled or buried by someone with access to law enforcement databases. Jennifer Walsh's case had been reported to Deputy Williams, the same Deputy Williams who was now missing. The same Deputy Williams whose desk had contained copies of confidential files. The scope of the corruption in my department was becoming clear, and it was worse than evidence tampering or drug money. Members of my staff had been actively participating in crimes against innocent people, using their positions to help predators track and harm victims. That night, as I sat in the hospital waiting room while Jennifer gave her statement to federal agents, I realized that Kevin's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. The dog that had been barking for 2 weeks straight had led us to uncover a criminal network that went far beyond anything I'd imagined. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. As I reviewed Jennifer's case file, I found something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the past 2 years. There had been other missing persons cases, other stalking reports, other instances where the system had failed victims in ways that seemed too systematic to be accidental. And every single one of them had been handled by the same group of officers. Officers who were supposed to be protecting and serving the community. Officers I had hired, trained, and trusted. The dog had stopped barking once Jennifer was rescued. Max the golden retriever had been trying to tell us for 2 weeks that someone needed help. An animal had shown more integrity and instinct for justice than some of the people wearing badges in my department. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface. If Kevin and Williams were involved in this network, and if Brennan had access to current law enforcement files, then someone else in my department was still feeding information to criminals. Someone who was still out there, still wearing a badge, still betraying everything we were supposed to stand for. The next morning would bring another revelation that would make me realize just how deep this conspiracy went, and how many people in positions of trust had been working against the very people they swore to protect. Have you ever ignored warning signs that turned out to be serious? Have you ever had a pet that seemed to be trying to tell you something important? Sometimes the most unlikely sources can lead us to the truth we need to find. Share your experiences in the comments below. 2 weeks after rescuing Jennifer Walsh, I thought we'd finally contained the corruption in my department. Federal agents had arrested 3 more suspects connected to the stalking network, and we'd implemented new security protocols for all case files. But on April 8, 2023, my wife Lisa made a discovery that turned my blood to ice and made me realize this conspiracy wasn't just about my department, it was personal. Lisa had been going through our mail that Saturday morning when she found an envelope with no return address, postmarked locally. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of our youngest daughter Emma playing in our backyard, taken from what appeared to be the neighbor's fence line. "Marcus, what is this?" Lisa asked, her voice already shaky. I studied the photo. It was recent. Emma was wearing the new pink dress Lisa had bought her just last week. The angle suggested it had been taken from the Kowalski house next door, but the Kowalskis were elderly and barely mobile. Someone else had been in their yard, photographing our family. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. I was heading for the door when Lisa called out, "Marcus, there's more." She'd found a second envelope mixed in with our junk mail. This one contained 3 more photographs. Me leaving for work on Tuesday morning, Lisa grocery shopping at Walmart, and our older son Tyler walking home from school. All taken within the past week, all from distances that suggested professional surveillance equipment. My hands were shaking as I looked at the images. After everything that had happened with Kevin's betrayal and the stalking network, someone was now targeting my family. But who? Kevin was in federal custody, Williams was still missing, and Brennan was facing federal kidnapping charges. I called Detective Martinez immediately. "Sarah, I need you at my house. Someone's been surveilling my family." "On my way, Sheriff." While waiting for Sarah, I walked our property perimeter, looking for signs of surveillance. What I found in our neighbor's backyard made my worst fears seem trivial by comparison. Hidden behind the Kowalski's garden shed was a small camouflaged box containing professional photography equipment, cameras with telephoto lenses, digital storage devices, and what appeared to be motion sensors. But the most disturbing discovery was a notebook detailing my family's daily routines. The notebook contained entries dating back 6 months. Thompson leaves for work 7:15 a.m. Tuesday/Thursday, 6:45 a.m. other days. Wife shops Walmart Tuesdays 2 p.m., Target Fridays 10 a.m. Daughter Emma plays outside 4 to 5 p.m. weekdays, supervised. Son Tyler walks home from school via Pine Street, arrives 3:25 p.m. Page after page of detailed observations about our lives, our habits, our vulnerabilities. Someone had been studying us like a science project for months. Sarah arrived just as I was photographing the surveillance equipment. "Jesus, Marcus. How long has this been going on?" "At least 6 months, based on these notes." We processed the scene carefully, but I already knew this was connected to the corruption in my department. The level of detail, the professional equipment, the systematic approach. This wasn't random harassment. Someone had been gathering intelligence on my family for a specific purpose. "We need to check the storage devices," Sarah said, bagging the digital equipment. Back at the station, what we found on those storage devices changed everything I thought I understood about the scope of this conspiracy. There were hundreds of photographs and videos of my family, dating back almost a year. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part was the organization. The files were sorted into folders with names like Daily Routines, Security Vulnerabilities, Pressure Points, and Contingency Plans. This wasn't stalking, this was operational planning. In the Pressure Points folder, I found detailed profiles of each family member. Lisa Thompson, primary vulnerability, children's safety. Responds to protection threats with compliance rather than resistance. Emma Thompson, age 8, trusting personality, routine playground visits make her accessible target. Tyler Thompson, age 14, walks alone from school, headphones create situational awareness gap. My family had been profiled like targets in an operation. Someone had spent months studying how to manipulate or threaten us. But that contingency plans folder revealed the true scope of what we were dealing with. It contained detailed scenarios for applying pressure to me. If Sheriff Thompson continues federal cooperation, escalate to direct family contact. If corruption investigation expands, demonstrate access to family members. If department purge proceeds, implement contingency protocols. This wasn't random harassment, this was a systematic campaign to control my actions as sheriff. Someone wanted to neutralize my cooperation with federal investigators by making me choose between justice and my family's safety. "Sarah, we need to expand our sweep. If they'd been watching my family, they might be watching yours too." That afternoon, we conducted surveillance sweeps at the homes of every key personnel involved in the corruption investigation. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Detective Martinez's apartment building had cameras hidden in the landscaping. The federal agent in charge of our case had been photographed entering and leaving his hotel. Even the prosecutor handling Kevin's case had been under surveillance. We weren't just dealing with corrupt deputies anymore. We were dealing with an organized criminal network that had been systematically gathering intelligence on law enforcement personnel and their families. That evening, as Lisa packed bags for her and the kids to stay with her sister in Atlanta, I realized the personal cost of trying to clean up my department. My family was being torn apart because I'd chosen to cooperate with federal investigators instead of covering up the corruption. How long will we have to stay away? Emma asked, not understanding why she couldn't sleep in her own bed. Just for a while, sweetheart. Until Daddy finishes some important work. But as I tucked her into the car for the drive to Atlanta, I wondered if my family would ever be safe to come home. The surveillance operation against us had been too sophisticated, too well-funded to be the work of a few corrupt deputies. This suggested resources and coordination that went far beyond local law enforcement. After Lisa and the kids left, I stayed up all night reviewing the surveillance files, looking for clues about who was behind this. That's when I found something that made me realize just how deep this conspiracy went. In one of the video files, recorded from inside our neighbor's yard, I could see part of a vehicle parked on the street during one of the surveillance sessions. The license plate was partially visible, and when I enhanced the image, I got a clear reading. The vehicle was registered to Clearwater County, one of our own patrol cars. Someone in my department hadn't just been feeding information to criminals. Someone in my department had been directly participating in the surveillance of my family. I ran the plate number through our dispatch system. The vehicle was assigned to Deputy Charles Anderson, a 12-year veteran who'd been with the department since before I became sheriff. Anderson had been one of the deputies I'd trusted most throughout this investigation. At 3 a.m., I drove to Anderson's house. His patrol car was in the driveway, and lights were on inside. When he answered the door, his reaction told me everything I needed to know. "Sheriff? What are you doing here?" "Charlie, we need to talk about some surveillance equipment we found." His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your patrol car was photographed at my house during surveillance operations against my family. You want to explain that?" Anderson looked past me to the street, then back to my face. "You should have let the federal investigation die quietly, Marcus. You should have taken the early retirement offer and walked away." "What early retirement offer?" "The one you're going to get on Monday morning. The county commissioners have some concerns about your leadership during this corruption scandal. They think it might be best if you step down gracefully." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about corrupt deputies, this was about political pressure to end the federal investigation. The surveillance of my family was designed to force me out of office before I could cooperate further with federal agents. "Who's behind this, Charlie?" "People who've been very patient with your crusade for justice. People who think the county was running just fine before you decided to be a hero." I thought about Commissioner Bradley Wright, who'd been pressuring me to limit the scope of the federal investigation. I thought about Judge Patricia Stevens, who'd been dismissing cases based on evidence concerns. I thought about District Attorney Robert Chin, who'd been reluctant to prosecute some of the corruption cases. "How many people are involved in this?" Anderson stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Enough to make sure you understand that fighting this is going to cost you everything: your job, your family's safety, your future in law enforcement." That's when I realized the full scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just corruption within my department. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple levels of county government, designed to protect a criminal network that had been operating for years. The surveillance of my family wasn't just intimidation, it was intelligence gathering for a larger operation to remove me from office and install someone more cooperative as sheriff. "Charlie, you've known my family for 12 years. You've been to Emma's birthday parties. How could you participate in threatening them?" For a moment, something like guilt flickered across his face. "I never wanted it to go this far, Marcus. But when you started cooperating with the feds, you made this personal. They needed leverage to make you stop. And if I don't stop?" Anderson looked genuinely sad. "Then your family will never be safe in this county. There are people with resources and connections that go way beyond what you can fight." As I drove home that night, I realized that everything I'd discovered: Kevin's betrayal, the evidence tampering, the stalking network, the surveillance of my family, was all connected to a much larger conspiracy. A conspiracy that involved not just corrupt deputies, but county officials, judges, prosecutors, and politicians. A conspiracy that had been operating for years, protecting criminal networks and eliminating threats to their operations. The surveillance of my family was just the beginning. On Monday morning, I would face the choice between my career and my family's safety. But what I didn't know yet was that the final revelation would make all of my previous discoveries seem minor by comparison. The real puppet master behind this entire operation was someone I'd never suspected, someone who'd been in plain sight all along, someone whose betrayal would make Kevin Morrison's treachery look like petty theft. Have you ever felt like you were fighting a system that was bigger than you could handle? Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and protecting your family? Sometimes standing up for justice requires sacrifices that seem impossible to make. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Monday morning, April 10th, 2023, I walked into my office expecting to face pressure from county commissioners about early retirement. Instead, I found FBI Special Agent Rebecca Stone waiting with a file that would reveal the true mastermind behind everything and connect all the pieces in a way that made my blood run cold. "Sheriff Thompson, we've identified the source of the leaked information in your department," Agent Stone said without preamble. "But first, I need to ask you about someone who moved to Clearwater County about 18 months ago." She slid a photograph across my desk. It showed a middle-aged man with graying hair and intelligent eyes, someone who looked vaguely familiar but I couldn't place. "His name is Dr. Thomas Garrett. He's a retired psychiatrist who moved here from Chicago in October 2021. Ring any bells?" I studied the photo more carefully. "Should it? Dr. Garrett has been renting basement apartments from homeowners throughout your county. He presents himself as a quiet tenant who values privacy and pays cash up front. Always targets houses owned by elderly residents or people going through financial difficulties." Agent Stone opened the file and showed me a map of Clearwater County with red dots marking various locations. "In the past 18 months, Dr. Garrett has lived in basement apartments at these 7 addresses. Notice anything interesting about the pattern?" I looked at the map and felt my stomach drop. The addresses formed a rough circle around key locations in our county: the courthouse, the sheriff's office, the homes of several county officials, and my own house. "He's been systematically positioning himself to observe county operations," I said. "More than observe. We believe Dr. Garrett has been the operational coordinator for the entire criminal network you've been uncovering. Kevin Morrison, Deputy Williams, the stalking ring, the surveillance of your family, all of it traces back to intelligence gathered by Dr. Garrett." Agent Stone turned to another page in the file. "Here's his real background. Dr. Thomas Garrett was stripped of his medical license in Illinois after being convicted of using his psychiatric practice to gather blackmail material on patients. He served 2 years in federal prison for extortion and conspiracy." The pieces were starting to fit together. "So he came here to set up a new operation." "Exactly. But instead of targeting individual patients, he's been targeting an entire county's power structure. The basement apartments gave him perfect cover. He could observe, gather intelligence, and coordinate criminal operations while appearing to be just another quiet tenant." Agent Stone showed me surveillance photos taken by federal agents over the past week. "We've been watching Dr. Garrett since we connected him to some of the leaked files. What we've discovered is that he's been running the entire corruption network from these basement apartments." The photos showed Garrett meeting with various people I recognized: County Commissioner Wright, Judge Stevens, and several others I couldn't identify. But the most shocking photo showed Garrett talking to someone whose presence made everything click into place: District Attorney Robert Chin. The man who'd been reluctant to prosecute corruption cases. The man who had access to all our case files, all our investigative reports, all our operational plans. "Chen's been feeding information to Garrett," I said. "Chen's been more than feeding information. We believe he's been the inside coordinator, using his position to protect the network's operations and eliminate threats. Every time you got close to exposing the corruption, Chen would tip Garrett, and they'd adjust their strategy." This explained everything. Why cases had been dismissed on technicalities. Why evidence had gone missing before trials. Why witnesses had disappeared or changed their testimony. The district attorney's office had been the source of the leaks all along. But there's more, Agent Stone continued. Dr. Garrett's current basement apartment is particularly interesting. He's been renting from elderly widow Margaret Foster on Elm Street. Mrs. Foster's house happens to have a perfect view of the elementary school where your daughter Emma attends classes. My blood turned to ice. He's been watching my daughter. We believe the surveillance of your family was coordinated from Mrs. Foster's basement. Dr. Garrett has been using the location to monitor your family's routines and coordinate the intimidation campaign designed to force you out of office. Agent Stone pulled out another set of photos. Yesterday, we executed a search warrant on Mrs. Foster's basement. What we found was essentially a command center for criminal operations throughout your county. The photos showed a basement converted into what looked like a surveillance nerve center. Multiple computer monitors, communication equipment, files on dozens of county residents, and walls covered with organizational charts showing the entire corruption network. Mrs. Foster had no idea what was happening in her basement. Agent Stone explained. Dr. Garrett told her he was a retired professor working on a research project. He paid her cash, helped with her grocery shopping, and presented himself as the perfect tenant. Where is he now? That's the problem. When we went to arrest him yesterday morning, the basement was empty. Garrett had cleared out, leaving behind only the equipment and files. Mrs. Foster said he mentioned visiting relatives out of state, but we believe he was tipped off about our investigation. The implication was clear. Someone had warned Garrett that federal agents were closing in. Someone with access to the investigation had given him time to escape. Who else knew about the search warrant? I asked. Agent Stone's expression was grim. Only a handful of people. Federal agents, your Detective Martinez, and D.A. Chen's office, since we needed to coordinate with local prosecutors. The betrayal kept getting deeper. Not only had Chen been protecting the criminal network, he'd warned Garrett about the federal investigation, allowing the mastermind behind everything to escape. But we did get lucky, Agent Stone continued. Before fleeing, Dr. Garrett left behind detailed records of his operations. What we've found reveals the scope of what he was running. She showed me page after page of documents. Dr. Garrett had been coordinating not just the corruption in my department, but criminal operations throughout the region. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, extortion, fraud, all of it organized and protected through his network of corrupt officials. The documents showed payments to Kevin Morrison, Deputy Williams, and others for specific services. Intelligence gathering, evidence tampering, case dismissals, witness intimidation, everything had been carefully planned and executed under Garrett's direction. But the most disturbing discovery was this, Agent Stone said, pulling out a final file. Inside were detailed psychological profiles of everyone involved in the corruption network, including me. Dr. Garrett had been using his psychiatric background to manipulate and control the people in his network. He'd identified each person's vulnerabilities and designed specific strategies to exploit them. Kevin Morrison's file showed that Garrett had targeted him because of financial pressures and a gambling addiction I'd never known about. Deputy Williams had been compromised through evidence of an affair that could have destroyed his marriage. Even Commissioner Wright had been manipulated through blackmail involving tax evasion. My own profile was the most chilling. Garrett had identified my family as my primary vulnerability and had designed the entire surveillance and intimidation campaign to force me into compliance. Subject Thompson's rigid moral code makes direct corruption unlikely. Recommend indirect pressure through family threats. Subject will prioritize family safety over professional obligations. Dr. Garrett had been playing psychological chess with our entire county, manipulating good people into criminal behavior and eliminating anyone who threatened his operation. There's one more thing, Agent Stone said. We found evidence that Dr. Garrett wasn't working alone. He appears to have been part of a larger organization that specializes in corrupting small-town and county government systems. She showed me communications between Garrett and contacts in other states. Similar operations were running in rural counties across the Midwest and South. The corruption in Clearwater County wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a systematic campaign to infiltrate and control local government systems. How many other counties are compromised? We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests dozens. The model is always the same: identify key vulnerabilities in local power structures, insert coordinators like Dr. Garrett, recruit or compromise local officials, and establish protection for criminal operations. The scope was staggering. What I thought was local corruption was actually part of a national criminal enterprise designed to undermine law enforcement and democratic institutions at the grassroots level. What happens now? We're conducting coordinated raids across multiple states. District Attorney Chin was arrested this morning, along with Commissioner Wright and Judge Stevens. We're working to identify and arrest everyone involved in the network. Agent Stone closed the file. But Dr. Garrett is still out there. He knows your family was threatened, he knows you've been cooperating with federal investigators, and he knows his operation has been exposed. We consider him extremely dangerous. That afternoon, I called Lisa in Atlanta. It's going to be longer before you can come home. How much longer, Marcus? I don't know. The person behind all this is still out there, and until we catch him, I can't guarantee your safety. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my decision to expose the corruption in my department had cost me everything. My family was in hiding, my career was in ruins, and the community I'd sworn to protect had been systematically undermined by criminals who understood exactly how to exploit our trust and institutions. But there was one small victory. The criminal network that had operated in the shadows for years was finally being exposed. Corrupt officials were being arrested, victims were getting justice, and communities across multiple states were learning the truth about how their governments had been compromised. 3 months later, Dr. Garrett was arrested in Mexico attempting to cross into Central America. His capture led to the exposure of criminal networks in over 40 counties across 12 states. Hundreds of corrupt officials were arrested, and millions of dollars in stolen assets were recovered. The basement apartments he'd used as command centers were revealed to be part of an elaborate intelligence operation designed to infiltrate and control local government systems. His psychiatric background had made him uniquely effective at identifying and exploiting the personal vulnerabilities of public officials. Kevin Morrison received a 15-year federal sentence. Deputy Williams was arrested in Florida and received 12 years. District Attorney Chin was sentenced to 20 years for his role in coordinating the cover-up. As for me, I resigned as sheriff once the federal investigation was complete. My family moved to North Carolina, where I work as a federal consultant helping other law enforcement agencies identify and prevent similar corruption networks. But I still wake up some nights thinking about how close we came to losing everything. How a psychiatrist living in basement apartments had nearly succeeded in controlling an entire county through psychological manipulation and systematic corruption. The most disturbing realization was how many good people had been turned into criminals through expert manipulation of their personal vulnerabilities. Dr. Garrett understood that everyone has pressure points, and he was skilled at finding and exploiting them. The basement apartments weren't just hiding places, they were psychological laboratories where a criminal mastermind studied and manipulated an entire community. And if it hadn't been for a dog that wouldn't stop barking, he might have succeeded. Have you ever wondered who's really watching your community? Have you ever questioned whether the people in positions of power are really working in your best interests? Sometimes the greatest threats come from the shadows, from people who understand exactly how to exploit our trust in institutions. What signs would you look for in your own community? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.